So I wanted to start with a sentence that was mentioned many years ago now by Scott McNeely. Privacy is dead, get over it. On the other hand, there is Sony big leaks, and so the question is it dead, and who should care for not being dead?
Oh, I think it's an illusion. So it's dead or alive. It's like Santa Claus. The illusions are neither dead or alive. They're sort of a virus that prevents us from perceiving reality. And so I think it's never been alive. It always was an imaginary construct tied to the notion that an individual is it somehow exists, right? And maybe if you think of an individual as a person sitting in a house with a shotgun and a lock, then you have this notion of an individual with a sort of a castle, and within that castle there is privacy, and outside of that castle there's something else. But really, we constantly switch between being people with an interest in privacy and people with an interest in, oh, what are you thinking right now? And we constantly cross that border ourselves, and so it's an illusion for us to claim privacy if we don't really maintain it ourselves. Right? We're very curious people.
Well, if there ever was privacy, I think there can be still privacy in the future. But what is clear that with the digitalization, things have changed. And now the question is, how is it changing? It's definitely now moving a lot. So it is a relevant question, but saying that it's dead, I think that's too much.
And also this notion of kind of individual versus the corporation, there's a much richer kind of network structure in this, and the changing role in that network structure and the changing group membership within that structure all play in, so that this kind of black and white question of privacy and ownership and so on is always in the context of the group and the rest of the stage.
Nicholas, yeah.
Maybe just a word on I like your parallel with the illusion, but can we say that an illusion never dies?
Yes, that is well said.
So probably the point
sounds
is
even better in French.
Yeah, the point is how to make it alive, the illusion, because with the digitalization of the society, then we need new means to extend the privacy notion, which is very clear in a social environment, but not that clear in a numeric digital platforms.
It's very complex socially, right? Because you have shame and you have pride. And privacy hinges on the perception of shame and pride. Certain things I want private, maybe there's things I'm ashamed of, but certain things I will tell you all about, and I'm very proud of them. And that's how that boundary is articulated. So it's very psychological as well. And, yeah.
But it's social, and we are now like, we need to invent now what is the digital social, really, like in a sense of public sphere and in a sense of like the whole society, and we are not there yet at all. Of course, we never will be, but in a sense, we are in very fluctuating state at the moment.
Yes.
And it connects to this whole thing of identity management and what is identity in all these different contexts.
So one follow-up question then, since it's becoming clear that we're all wondering about this vagueness of whether it exists or not, illusion. But so now obviously there are undesired consequences, like whether information is leaked because a laptop is stolen with social security numbers, or maybe someone makes a mistake by putting autocomplete the wrong email and it goes to the wrong person. So information may end up in the wrong hands. How do you think would be the best way to deal with mitigating the causes of the information being in the wrong hands, which is probably what privacy should be?
No, it's not privacy, it's responsibility. So what we need in this case is the ability to take responsibility for our actions. So if I have social security numbers of 100 students on my laptop, the laptop gets stolen, it was my responsibility to make sure that doesn't happen, and I failed in my responsibility. So the question is, how can we become responsible users of data? And back to my slide, responsible actors of data. how can we take our roles seriously and say, oh, this really matters? And the reply to the wrong person, these things really matter. They're profound breakdowns of social dynamics, and we need to learn to take responsibility for them, but not claim that somebody else takes responsibility for us, or that somehow we should be exempted from responsibility because of privacy. No, we're responsible for the whole thing, for every action we take.
And it would be useful to build tools that help us understand better the consequences of our actions and help us manage the accidental email completion and so on. And there's starting to be tools like that. And so that is one place where technology can help in terms of helping to understand what are the implications of what you're doing to then manage the responsibility.
Right.
I think that the responsibility is an excellent point, and we need to learn to become responsible. But the actual consequence of the current situation is that there are those companies that are driving the digital innovation, and they are sort of in the borderline of being responsible. Some really clearly are not acting responsibly. But then, for example, in Finland, when we have been interacting with companies, there are many companies that are over-responsible. Because they have the legal department, they don't know anything about the digital world, but they are pushed to it because there's the competition. And because of this being over-responsible, they are saying, let's not do anything. Let's not use digital data at all for personalizing ourselves or anything like that. So since we don't have clear language on what is being responsible, or tools in sort of acting transparently and so forth, it's very hard, especially for those who really want to be responsible. And then if we don't empower those who want to be responsible, then we are in a really nasty situation, societally.
Nicolas.
Yeah, just something about responsibility. I'm not sure at all that we can be responsible, because responsibility means you should have means to exercise your responsibility. You should then, so where are the means? We should also maybe be punished, or also be responsible of our act, means recognize that we made a mistake and then compensate or something like that. And all this is impossible to get without, without technology, of course, but also without actions with law specialists, with economics, with business models, with transparency, with many things. So that's why we believe in our group that the first step towards responsibility is to give technical means to regulate the dissemination of the data. To some point, to some extent, also get responsibilities means attach sticky policies to the data, such that when you receive the data of another one, your hardware may also, or your software may also give you the set of recommendations about what is expected to do with this data, what usage you could perform. So I think the problem is, it's an interesting multidisciplinary problem.
Yeah. I just want to respond to this responsibility question of how complicated it is, because one of the reasons why it gets so complicated is because of automation, right? You mentioned autocomplete. Anytime we invoke automation, we have given up some degree of responsibility. And so maybe we've gone too far with automation. And really, the data revolution is about the automatic collection of data. And whereas in the past, it used to be you have to write everything down you want to know. But now we do this automatically with machines. And so a lot of the responsibility of collecting data in the first place has been delegated from humans to machines, which is maybe the source of the problem.
It seems like we are all in agreement that there is no perfect world, there is no perfect security. Ultimately, there are social norms, the world is changing, and technology is evolving. And so, in essence, it's going to be this interactive interplay between the technology and the adaptation of society that we will, part of it will happen in a certain way, part of it we can drive it. So the question, so that leads to another question, which is like, what could be the main driver to improving this, the situation, the technology or the policy? Which can start it first?
I can start with something. I was very impressed by an idea which is called privacy by using. So everybody knows the idea of privacy by design, which means that an organization should, from a bottom-up approach, drive at the time of conception, very early, should take every privacy things into account and build all the architecture with privacy in mind, etc. But it implies that somebody, I don't know who, but this guy who builds the system should know everything about privacy. So he must regulate himself what I will do with my data, which is nearly impossible. It's cultural things, social things, and it's very linked to individuals. So some people defend an approach which is called privacy by using, where we should make in vivo experiments. We should endow people with means to exercise privacy and measure things, and maybe then promote very specific for very small squared things way of doing it. But it's too complex problem to
You mean
to
sort
have
of
an
a
overall
case-by-case approach?
Sorry?
Like a case-by-case approach?
Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Do you have an opinion?
Yeah, it's like I told you about this. We have the operator alliance, so we are trying to build these companies who take this kind of personal data operator role. So we have been sitting together with them and trying to sort out. So what is the hard part here? And all of them are saying, so this is policy/technology exercise. So they come really hand in hand in this company's opinion. And perhaps the whole thing about regulation, it can be a little bit scary thing for some, but as a contrast to that thing, in Finland we have been asking, so who would, like we have been asking this question in some of our workshops, that who would you trust your personal data? And majority of people in Finland would actually trust their personal data to government systems. So that's probably not true in rest of the other countries, but it really changes. And so this is like the policy is there, and policy needs to act in order to that. Now we have really huge gray area on how to act here, and the policy is the only mean to sort of narrow that gap. We need to have a fairly clear black and white situation, or what is right and what is wrong, so that those who are trying to do the right thing can do it easily.
And Lisa, since you talked to us about inference and people don't necessarily know what happens with all the data is collected, do you think that it's more of a technology or policy that should improve that?
Yeah, so I don't think that there's going to be a full solution that's a technology solution. I think that kind of understanding the issues is hugely important. Policy is also challenging, and so it's more of this development of kind of new norms and what is the social construct, what are the new social constructs and economic constructs and so on. And so that's why this whole conversation of this workshop is very interesting. But trying to say, even some of the questions of the data being objective that were raised earlier by Mackenzie, I think are hugely important. This notion that data is something abstract in isolation. You have to understand the context. There's bias in the data. There's all kinds of weird things that happen, especially as you add in economic structures as well. So it's not technology, it's not policy, it's this kind of bigger definition, social structure.
So before I open for questions to the audience, I wanted to ask one quick question about monetization. Do you believe that we will ever be in a world where people can make money out of their data?
Well, before I didn't actually answer your policy and
please.
technology question.
Sorry.
And I wanted to say just that the relationship between the two is so important.
Right.
How do the two relate to each other? And they always have to stand in context. Really, we already are in a situation where data has become more powerful than the forces that regulate it. But that has a good reason, because the regulators include the government, which brought the NSA to us. So we can't really turn to the government and say, "Oh, please fix this for us," because you already screwed it up. So who are we going to turn to? And so to me, the idea comes up that we should turn to our communities and the communities of visible actors and say, "Oh, I'm going to work out my trust issues with you and figure out where we have common ground." And it's going to be smaller communities, ad hoc communities, and it's going to be a constant question that needs to be addressed all the time. Much like the example of a wedding, a union between two people. When you get together, you say, "Okay, how are we going to do this thing?" And there's technology, there's policy, there's feelings, there's privacy. But the crafting of the interface of how a wedding goes on is done by all the participants and together, and that's kind of the model I'm looking for. So how can we craft interfaces for data that bring communities together? Your next question, yeah, of course, it's a economy, and it's a huge economy, and we haven't figured out how to make it fair yet. It's not fair. It's where data serfs. We're slaves to. We produce data.
Any other comments on the monetization part?
I just want to add, this is a micro comment in the context of that. Once you add in monetization, how much more bias you'll get in the data, because it's like, oh, I'm going to get all the people with really big feet and really small feet because they're proud of their feet size. They're the ones that want to sell it, but the normal. So being able to take that into account once you add that in to your data analysis. I know that's not answering your question, but
it brings up another viewpoint, which is important. Yeah. Kai, what do you think?
There's many complex issues related to the economic model. So we have been trying to figure out different means on what kind of business models could there be, and it's really hard. For example, the one question that there is that can we charge from the transactions of the content management or transaction of data flow. It's not really paying for the money, but it's sort of related to it. There was a question about tax, so it's a little bit similar thing. It might work, but nobody really knows. I think that the design of the economic system is the one that drives the technology. It will deeply influence also the policy making, and perhaps like the earlier question, policy or technology, and you mentioned that there's a big social realm, the economy, policy, and the technology, they all need to be designed together. But it's a really interesting systemic design exercise, definitely there.
Nicholas, your quick point on monetization.
I just want to mention, because we hear very often that when we speak about personal data monetization, that there is an ethical problem, which means, okay, if you are a privacy concerned person, you should not drive towards monetization of data, which could be comparable to I don't know, if I want to sell my hairs or my teeth, but indeed by discussing with I'm just a computer scientist, so I have no clear opinion about that, but by discussing with people from economy and from law, I am now pretty convinced that in fact this kind of means is fundamental, and it can be. I mean, it's, from my point of view, the only strong incentive I can see for people to manage themselves, their privacy. It's to be responsible for that kind of.
So we're back to the responsibility.
Yeah.
Very good. So we have time for a couple of questions. I think the first one came up from the very back there.
It's a question for Kim from Finland. As you know, the EU represents a very special privacy environment compared to this country and many others. In particular, it's quite a dramatic difference that in the European countries there is no legal, what they call secondary release of personal data. In other words, when you provide data for a magazine subscription or to a retailer or to your bank or a credit card company, they may not legally release that information or share it for any other purpose. I don't have to tell you, that's not how things work in North America. Would your noble experiment, which fascinates me, and I'm sure everybody so much, would it be possible in an environment like a legal environment like this one, where, of course, all of these other interested parties will rise up in unison against the idea that that secondary release should be restricted?
I think that's excellent question, and perhaps the fundamental question why we came here with my colleagues to really try to figure out that is this model that we are trying to apply now, is it anyway compatible with the way of thinking here in States? And I'm happy to engage this discussion more, but clearly it needs probably, yeah, it's very hard to say how that could be applied here, because one of the core economic drivers of our approach clearly is to sort of realize the secondary release, or to allow third parties to take advantage of the data and allow the data flows, which you wouldn't need any infrastructure here at the moment as such. The companies wouldn't need it, but in Europe companies need that stuff. They need it even for themselves, that there are like cases in Finland that for example, a retail store chain, grocery store chain can't really, like they have a spin-out extension and they can't really provide even the user data to that spin-out, which clearly would need to have the loyalty card data. And this is very restrictive, and it really restricts innovation, so there is need for this kind of dynamic content management because of this.
We have time for one last quick question here.
Thank you. I will try to be quick. I'm Kevin Lanning. I'm a social scientist. And I have a two-part question. The first part is a brief comment. What for many of us seems like a fetish about privacy is to others a deeply held value. And I think that as we move forward, we have to be sensitive to that. That's kind of part one. And part two is almost directly in opposition to that. We live in a time of spiraling inequality and social injustice. And we've always made inferences about other people based on their appearance, based on their ethnicity, their age, their gender. We're living in a time in which the loss of privacy we've also got police cameras now, and the potential to observe behavior and maybe to address some of these inequalities. I guess the question for me is, can the time of big data, is it going to exacerbate social inequalities? Because we know that networks and complex systems help create inequality. Or is it something that's going to be a force for social justice that's going to allow us to see beneath people's skin?
Who wants to take it?
I'll make one comment with respect to it. So I do think it's this double-edged sword, that there's this element of being able to understand more about the bias and the inequities, and then how can we do things. But then there's a lot of bias in the data that's collected now. So in the context of, say, youth and education, it's the disadvantaged youth that are in the system that have, you know, the criminal justice records and the social records and so on. So you have tons of information about one class versus, you know, the very privileged. You don't have nearly as much information. So there's certainly an inequity in the information being gathered, and then how that's going to play out in terms of whether it's going to go towards the positive, towards helping smooth the inequities or creating greater inequities. Depends if you're an optimist or a pessimist.
I think there's a polarization between those who believe data will create inequities and those who won't, who believe data won't produce inequities. And one of the forms of that tension comes in the Google bus protests, where, you know, the power that technology companies that understand how to monetize data have and the financial power, the market power, is so enormously different from the growth rate of any other industry that naturally tensions arise. And so that's one thing that'll definitely happen. And we'll see more of that. And I think we should, you know, think of mechanisms by which we can take back that monetization power and democratize it again. I think democracy fell out of the equation of data, and we need to insert democracy back into that. And so as I mentioned earlier, I think one way to do that would be to consider how to tax data and distribute the benefits of data to all participants of a society.
Great. I think our time is up. And so thank you very much to the whole panel.